The blood trailing down her calf had already soaked through the rough fabric wrapped around Greta's ankle, and each step sent white-hot pain shooting up her leg, until she stumbled against a birch tree, gasping through clenched teeth. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since her clan discovered she had warned the human settlement about the raid, and the punishment for such betrayal would have been swift and brutal. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, thick with summer growth that made it impossible to see more than 20 paces ahead, and somewhere behind her, she knew her brothers were still hunting. Her twisted ankle had happened that morning when she had leaped across a ravine, misjudging the distance in her exhaustion. The landing had been catastrophic, her foot catching on a root and rolling sideways with a sickening crack that still echoed in her memory. For the past 6 hours, she had been limping forward on determination alone, but now her body simply refused to continue. The green skin of her hands looked pale even to her own eyes, and her tusks ached from how hard she had been grinding her jaw against the agony. Greta slid down the trunk of the birch until she was sitting in the moss, her injured leg stretched out before her. The ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, purple and hot to the touch beneath the makeshift bandage. She unwrapped it carefully, wincing as the fabric stuck to dried blood, and stared at the damage with a strange detachment. Without proper treatment, she would not be walking again anytime soon, and out here alone, that meant death would come slowly from exposure or predators, whichever found her first. The sound of footsteps made her head snap up, and she reached for the knife at her belt with fingers that trembled from fatigue. Through the trees came a figure, tall and broad-shouldered, unmistakably human from his rounded ears and the pale tan of his skin. He wore the simple clothes of a frontiersman, leather vest over a linen shirt, trousers tucked into sturdy boots, and he carried a bow across his back with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. His hair was the color of wheat in late summer, tied back from a face that was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26 years, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. Warren Jameson had been tracking the wounded deer for an hour when he stumbled upon something far more unexpected than any animal. An orc woman sat against a birch tree, her hand on a knife but her eyes glassy with pain and exhaustion. His first instinct was to step back, to melt into the forest and pretend he had never seen her, because everyone knew that orcs were dangerous, that they raided human settlements and took no prisoners. But something about the scene stopped him from retreating. She was hurt badly. That much was obvious from the swollen ankle and the blood that stained the moss around her. Her dark hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, and her face, though marked by exhaustion, held a kind of fierce dignity that made him hesitate. She wore the practical clothing of a hunter, leather and fur that had seen hard use, and her green skin was marked with scratches and bruises from her flight through the forest. Their eyes met, hers a startling amber that reminded him of honey held up to sunlight, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Warren could see the calculation in her gaze, the way she was measuring whether she had the strength to fight or run, and finding herself lacking in both options. His hand stayed well away from his own weapons, held out instead in what he hoped was a gesture of peace. "Easy there," he said quietly, his voice carrying the soft drawl of someone raised on the frontier. "I am not looking for trouble." Greta's grip on her knife did not loosen, but she did not throw it either. "Then keep walking, human. This does not concern you." He should have done exactly that. Warren knew the dangers of getting involved with orcs, had heard all the stories since childhood about their savagery and their hatred of his kind. But something about the way she sat there, clearly in agony but still trying to maintain her pride, reminded him of a wolf he had once found caught in a trap, snarling and snapping even as it slowly bled out. He had freed that wolf, and it had limped away into the forest without a backwards glance, but he still remembered the moment when the animal had finally understood he meant no harm. "That ankle needs treatment," Warren said, taking a single careful step closer. "It is badly twisted, maybe broken." "You will not make it far without help," I said. "Keep walking." Her voice was harder now, edged with desperation that she tried to hide. "I do not need human charity, and I certainly do not need you." Warren stopped moving but did not retreat. "I have medical supplies back at my cabin." "It is not far, maybe a mile through those pines." He gestured to the west where the forest thinned slightly. "I can bind that ankle properly, give you food and water. After that you can leave or stay, your choice." Greta laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Why would you help me?" "My kind has raided your settlements, killed your people. For all you know, I was part of those raids." "Were you?" Warren asked simply. The question hung in the air between them. Greta's jaw worked as if she was chewing on words too difficult to spit out. Finally, she shook her head once, a sharp, jerky motion. "No, I warned the last settlement. That is why my clan hunts me now." Warren nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense, though his mind was reeling from the implications. An orc who had betrayed her own people to save humans would be marked for death by both sides if anyone found out. He understood exile, understood what it meant to be cut off from everything you had ever known, because he had left his own family's farm 3 years ago after his father told him to choose between the woman he loved and his inheritance. He had chosen love, and she had died that winter from fever, leaving him alone on the frontier with nothing but memories and regrets. "All the more reason to let me help," he said finally. "My cabin has good walls and a strong door. You can rest there until you are healed enough to move on." Greta studied him with those amber eyes, searching for deception or ulterior motives. She found something in his face that must have satisfied her, because her grip on the knife finally loosened slightly. "I cannot walk." "I know." Warren moved closer now, slowly enough that she could object if she wanted, and knelt beside her in the moss. This close, he could see the fine details of her face, the way her tusks curved just slightly over her lower lip, the proud arch of her nose, the exhaustion that bruised the skin beneath her eyes. "I am going to lift you. It will hurt, but I will try to be gentle." "I can manage," she started to protest, but Warren was already sliding one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. She was heavier than a human woman her size would have been, solid muscle and dense bone, but he had spent years hauling lumber and game through these forests, and he stood with her in his arms without visible strain. Greta bit back a cry as the movement jostled her ankle, her hand instinctively grabbing his shoulder for support. The pain was excruciating, but she would not give him the satisfaction of hearing her scream. Through the haze of agony, she was aware of being carried through the forest, of the steady rhythm of his breathing and the sure way he navigated between trees without looking down at his feet. His scent was strange to her, wood smoke and leather and something else she could not identify, completely different from the musk of orc males. The cabin appeared through the trees after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. It was well built, solid logs chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney rising from one end, and a small covered porch at the front. Warren kicked the door open with one boot and carried her inside, setting her down as carefully as possible on a low bed covered with furs and wool blankets. The interior was simple but clean. A single large room with a fireplace, a rough table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools, and a small area that served as a kitchen. Greta's vision swam as she lay back against the pillows, her body finally allowing itself to acknowledge the full extent of its exhaustion now that she was no longer in immediate danger. Warren moved around the cabin with efficient purpose, lighting a lantern as the afternoon sun began to fade, pulling various items from shelves and bringing them to the bedside. She watched him through half-closed eyes, still not entirely trusting but too tired to maintain her guard. "I am going to need to cut away the boot," Warren said, kneeling beside the bed with a sharp knife in hand. "The swelling has made it too tight, and trying to pull it off will just cause more damage." Greta nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice shaking. She felt his hands on her calf, steady and warm, as he carefully sliced through the leather of her boot and peeled it away from her skin. The ankle beneath looked even worse exposed to the light, mottled purple and black, swollen grotesquely. Warren's face remained calm as he examined it, his fingers probing gently along the bones, and she did cry out then, unable to stop herself. "I know," he murmured, something almost like an apology in his voice. "I know it hurts. The good news is I do not think it is broken, just badly sprained. The bad news is that it will take weeks to heal properly." He set to work with the confidence of someone who had treated injuries before, cleaning the wound with water and a cloth, applying a poultice that smelled of herbs she could not identify, but that immediately began to cool the burning pain. Then came the binding, long strips of clean linen wrapped around her ankle in a careful pattern that supported without cutting off circulation. His hands were gentle despite their size, careful not to cause unnecessary pain, and Greta found herself watching his face as he worked. There was something peaceful about his expression, a kind of focused calm that spoke of a man comfortable with solitude and his own company. His features were pleasant in a rugged way, strong bones and a straight nose that had probably been broken at least once, and his eyes, when they occasionally flicked up to meet hers, were a clear gray that reminded her of winter skies. She had never been this close to a human male before, had certainly never been touched by one with anything other than violence in mind, and the strange gentleness of it left her feeling off balance. "There," Warren said finally, tying off the bandage and sitting back on his heels. "That should help with the swelling and support the joint while it heals. You will need to stay off it completely for at least a week, then very light movement after that." "A week?" Greta tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. "I cannot stay here for a week. My brothers will be searching, and if they find me here, they will kill us both." Warren stood and moved to the small kitchen area, beginning to prepare food with the same economical movements he had used for everything else. "Then we will deal with that if it happens. For now, you need food and rest. When was the last time you ate anything?" Greta tried to remember and could not. 2 days ago, 3. She had been living on stream water and the few berries she could gather while running. Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and Warren smiled slightly, the first real expression she had seen on his face since he found her. "Thought so," he said, and began slicing bread and cheese, adding dried meat to a wooden plate. He brought it to her along with a cup of water, and Greta found herself eating without hesitation, her body's needs overriding her caution. The food was simple but good, and she realized as she ate just how close to collapse she had been. Warren settled into a chair by the cold fireplace, watching her eat with the patient quiet of someone used to observing animals in the forest. When she finally finished and set the plate aside, he spoke again, his voice neutral and non-threatening. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to, but it might help if I knew what I am dealing with. How many are hunting you, and how determined are they to find you?" Greta leaned back against the pillows, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. 3 of my brothers. Maybe more by now, depending on whether my father has sent others. They will be very determined. What I did is considered the worst kind of betrayal among my people." "The settlement you warned, that was River Bend?" Warren asked, and she nodded. "I heard about that." The town was ready when the raiding party came, drove them off with only a few injuries on either side. People have been wondering how they knew the attack was coming. "I overheard the War Council planning it," Greta said quietly, her eyes distant as she remembered. "They were going to attack at dawn, kill anyone who resisted, take captives. The children, the old ones, no one would have been spared. I could not." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I could not let that happen, so I ran ahead and warned them." Warren was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. "That took courage. You gave up everything you knew to save strangers. Or I am a traitor and a coward who betrayed her own blood," Greta said bitterly. "That is certainly what my clan thinks. What do you think?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before, had never cared what she thought about anything. In her clan, females were expected to support the males in their decisions, to be strong and fierce but ultimately obedient. The fact that this human, this stranger, would ask her opinion on anything seemed almost absurd. "I think," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "that killing children in their beds is not strength or courage. I think that raiding parties that target the weakest prey are no better than cowards. And I think that if that makes me a traitor, then I would rather be a traitor than a murderer." Warren nodded, something like approval in his eyes. "For what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. And you are safe here, at least for now. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and no one comes out this far without good reason." Greta felt her eyes growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay awake. The combination of food, warmth, and the sudden absence of immediate danger was pulling her down into sleep like a current pulling a swimmer under. She tried to fight it, knowing she should stay alert, should maintain her guard, but her body had other ideas. "Sleep," Warren said softly, standing to pull the blankets up over her. "I will keep watch. You are safe." The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the strange comfort of those words, spoken by someone who had no reason to care whether she lived or died, and the even stranger realization that she believed him. When Greta woke, the cabin was dim with pre-dawn light filtering through the single window, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Her hand went to her belt automatically, searching for the knife, and found it still there. That surprised her enough to fully wake her, and she turned her head to find Warren sitting in the same chair by the fireplace, his bow across his knees, clearly having kept watch through the entire night. He noticed her movement and stood, stretching muscles that must have been stiff from the long vigil. "How are you feeling?" Greta took stock of herself. The ankle still throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but the sharp agony of yesterday had faded to something more manageable. The rest of her body felt heavy and sore, but the desperate exhaustion had been blunted by sleep. "Better," she admitted grudgingly. "You stayed awake all night." "Someone needed to," Warren said with a slight shrug, moving to the kitchen area to stoke the fire in the stove. "Besides, I am used to it. Living alone out here, you learn to sleep light and wake at any unusual sound." He began preparing breakfast, something with eggs and the remainder of last night's bread, and Greta watched him move around the cabin with the easy familiarity of long practice. There was something deeply strange about this whole situation, about being cared for by someone who should be her enemy, and she found herself struggling to understand his motivations. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, unable to contain the question any longer. "You could have left me in the forest to die. It would have been easier, safer. Instead, you brought me to your home, used your supplies on me, gave up your sleep to keep watch." Why? Warren was quiet for a moment, focused on flipping the eggs in the pan. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost hesitant. About 3 years ago, I found a wolf caught in a trap. It had been there for days, slowly dying. It snarled at me when I approached, tried to bite me even though it could barely lift its head. I could have killed it, should have probably, since trapped wolves usually have to be put down anyway. But something about the way it looked at me, with more fury than fear, made me want to try. He plated the food and brought it to her before continuing. I freed that wolf and it limped away into the forest. I never saw it again, and I do not know if it survived or died a day later. But I know I made the choice I could live with, and that mattered more than the practical considerations. Greta took the plate, her amber eyes searching his face. I am not a wolf. No, Warren agreed, settling back into his chair with his own breakfast. You are a person who made a hard choice and paid a heavy price for it. That deserves respect, not abandonment. They ate in silence for a while, and Greta found herself thinking about his words. In her clan, strength was everything, and compassion was seen as weakness. The idea that helping someone weaker could be considered admirable rather than foolish was foreign to everything she had been taught. Yet here sat this human, who had every reason to hate her kind, offering her safety without asking for anything in return. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Warren would wake at dawn and check her ankle, changing the bandages and applying fresh poultice with the same careful gentleness he had shown that first day. Then he would prepare breakfast for both of them before heading out to check his traps and tend to the small garden behind the cabin. He never went far, never left her alone for more than an hour or two, and Greta realized he was staying close in case her brothers appeared. She spent the forced stillness watching him through the window, observing the way he moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone deeply comfortable in the wilderness. He was a good hunter. That much was obvious from the game he brought back, and skilled at the 100 small tasks that frontier living demanded. She watched him split wood for the fire, mend a tear in his shirt, work leather into new bootlaces, all with the patient focus she was coming to recognize as fundamental to his character. On the third day, Greta insisted on sitting up properly rather than lying in bed like an invalid. Warren helped her maneuver until she was propped against the wall with pillows supporting her back, her injured leg stretched out before her. The ankle looked better already, the swelling reduced, and the colors fading from the angry purple-black to a sickly yellow-green that meant healing was underway. You have done this before, she observed as he rewrapped the bandage. Treated injuries like this. Warren nodded. I was in a militia unit for a few years back before I moved out here. We did not have proper doctors most of the time, so you learned to handle whatever came up. Sprains, breaks, arrow wounds, fevers. You learned or people died. Is that why you left, the fighting? He hesitated, his hand stilling on the bandage for just a moment before continuing their work. No, I left because the woman I loved died, and staying in the place we had planned to build a life together was too painful. Out here, the loneliness is by choice, which makes it easier to bear somehow. Greta heard the old grief in his voice, the kind that had scarred over but never fully healed. What was her name? Sarah. She was a farmer's daughter, had a laugh that could light up a room and a stubborn streak a mile wide. We were going to be married that spring, but winter fever took her in February. Warren tied off the bandage and sat back, his eyes distant. That was 3 years ago. I sold everything I had and moved out here where no one knew me, built this cabin with my own hands. It is not much, but it is mine. I am sorry, Greta said, and meant it. She understood loss, understood the way grief could hollow you out and leave you functioning but not fully alive. She would probably be proud of you building a life out here alone. Warren smiled slightly, a sad curve of his lips. Maybe. She always said I was too much of a loner for my own good. Of course, she usually said that right before dragging me to some social gathering I wanted no part of, so maybe she would be horrified that I proved her right. That surprised a laugh out of Greta, rusty from disuse but genuine. Warren's smile widened at the sound, and for a moment the sadness lifted from his features, making him look younger. The shared moment of humor felt significant somehow, a small bridge being built between two people from different worlds. As the days passed, they began to talk more. Warren would sit by the bed in the evenings after supper, and they would exchange stories about their lives, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Greta told him about growing up in the clan, about the constant pressure to be strong and fierce, about how she had always felt slightly out of step with the values her people held. She talked about her mother, who had died in a raid when Greta was 12, and how that loss had begun her questioning of whether strength through violence was really strength at all. Warren talked about his childhood on his family's farm, about learning to hunt and track from his grandfather, about the slow, painful process of watching his mother succumb to illness when he was 15. He talked about Sarah, about their plans for the future, about how her death had felt like having his entire world ripped away. He talked about the quiet satisfaction of building something with his own hands, about the peace he found in the forest, about the way loneliness could be both a comfort and a curse. On the 7th day, Warren declared that she could try putting weight on the ankle, but only with his support and only for short distances. He helped her stand, one arm around her waist to take most of her weight, and Greta took her first tentative step in a week. The ankle held, though it protested with sharp twinges of pain that made her gasp. "Easy," Warren murmured, his arm tightening around her. "Do not push it too hard, just a few steps to the table and back." They made the slow journey across the cabin, Greta leaning heavily on him, and by the time they reached the table she was breathing hard from the effort. But she had done it, had walked on her own power, and the small victory felt immense after days of helplessness. Warren helped her into a chair, and she sat there feeling ridiculously proud of herself for managing 10 steps. "Good," Warren said, approval clear in his voice. "The healing is progressing well. Another week or two, and you should be able to walk on your own, though it will be longer before you can run or climb." Another week or two. The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Greta knew she should be planning to leave as soon as she could walk, should be thinking about where she would go, and how she would survive alone in a world where both humans and orcs would view her as an enemy. But the thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Warren, filled her with an unexpected reluctance. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the quiet competence with which he handled everything, to the gentle way he treated her despite having every reason to see her as a monster. More than accustomed, she admitted to herself in moments of painful honesty. She had begun to look forward to his return from checking the traps, to the sound of his voice in the evening, to the rare smiles he offered when she said something that amused him. The realization was dangerous, she knew. Nothing could come of these feelings beyond heartache and complication. They were from different worlds, different species, and even if he did feel something in return, which she very much doubted, what kind of future could they possibly have? He would always be human, and she would always be orc, and the prejudices of both their peoples would make any relationship impossible. Warren seemed unaware of her internal turmoil, focused on preparing the evening meal. But Greta noticed the way his eyes lingered on her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, Notice the care he took to make sure she was comfortable. Notice the way he positioned himself between her and the door whenever they heard sounds from outside. He was protecting her, she realized, had been from the moment he found her in the forest, and that protection came from something deeper than simple kindness to a wounded creature. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the fireplace. On the 10th day, the sound of voices outside brought them both to alert stillness. Warren moved immediately to the window, peering out through a gap in the shutters, his body tense. Greta struggled to her feet, ignoring the protest from her ankle, her hand going to the knife at her belt. 3 orcs, Warren said quietly, his voice calm but edged with tension. Males heavily armed. They are searching the area systematically, checking every tree and bush. Greta's heart clenched. Her brothers had found her trail. She hobbled to the window and looked out, her worst fears confirmed when she recognized the figures moving through the trees. Krug, her oldest brother, led the search, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. Behind him came Drog and Tark, twins who had always been the most vicious of her siblings. "I have to go," Greta said urgently, already moving toward the door despite the pain in her ankle. "If they find me here, they will kill you. I will not let that happen." Warren caught her arm gently but firmly. "You cannot outrun them, not with that ankle. You would make it maybe 100 yards before they caught you." "Then what do you suggest?" Greta demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "They will not stop searching until they find me." "That is how my clan handles traitors." Warren was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working through options. Then he moved to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch before Greta could stop him. She watched through the window, her heart in her throat as he raised his voice to carry through the forest. "You there in the trees. I'm coming out unarmed. I want to talk." The 3 orcs emerged from the forest, weapons drawn, their faces twisted with suspicion and aggression. Krug stepped forward, his hand on the massive axe at his belt, his eyes raking over Warren with obvious contempt. "A human," Krug said, his voice a deep rumble that reminded Greta painfully of their father. "What business do you have interfering in orc matters?" "I am not interfering," Warren said, his voice level and respectful but not subservient. "I am simply a man living alone in the forest. I have seen no one in weeks." Drog, never the patient one, snarled and took a step forward. "Do not lie to us, human. We tracked our sister to this area. If you are hiding her, you will die screaming." Inside the cabin, Greta watched with mounting dread. She knew her brothers, knew their capacity for violence, and knew they would not simply take Warren's word and leave. She should go out there, should give herself up to save him, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor by the terrible fear of what would happen if she did. Warren stood his ground, though Greta could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have hidden no one. You are welcome to search the area if you wish, but you will find nothing. I am just a trapper trying to make a living. Your family business is your own." Krug studied him for a long moment, his small eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then he gestured to the twins. "Search the cabin. Kill him if he resists." Greta had perhaps 3 seconds to make a choice. She could hide, could try to conceal herself and hope they somehow missed her, but that would only condemn Warren when they inevitably found her. Or she could face them, could step out and accept whatever punishment they had planned, but at least Warren might survive. The decision was easier than she expected. She opened the door and limped out onto the porch, her head held high despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I am here, Krug. Leave the human alone. This is between us." The shock on her brothers' faces would have been comical under other circumstances. They had clearly not expected her to be actually inside the cabin, and certainly not expected her to announce herself. Krug recovered first, his expression hardening into the cold fury she remembered from childhood punishments. "Greta," he said, her name sounding like a curse in his mouth. "You have led us on quite a chase, sister. Father is not pleased." "I imagine he is not," Greta replied, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "I suppose he sent you to bring me back. He sent us to end your treachery permanently," Tark said, his hand moving to the blade at his belt. "You warned the humans, betrayed your own blood. There is only one punishment for that." Warren had moved slightly, positioning himself between Greta and her brothers in a gesture that was both protective and foolish. "She is under my protection," he said quietly. "You will have to go through me to get to her." Drog laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "That can be arranged, human. You do not know what you are protecting. She is a traitor and a coward, not worth your death." "I know exactly who she is," Warren said, and something in his voice made even Krug pause. "She is someone who chose compassion over cruelty, who saved lives rather than taking them. That takes more courage than swinging an axe at unarmed villagers." The insult hung in the air, and Greta saw the exact moment when her brothers decided Warren had to die. They moved as one, weapons clearing their sheaths, and she found herself screaming his name as they rushed forward. What happened next occurred so fast it was hard to track all the details. Warren's hand had been resting on the porch railing, and he used it to vault the short distance between him and Krug, his boot connecting solidly with the orc's knee in a move that spoke of military training and real combat experience. Krug bellowed in pain and surprise, stumbling back, and Warren rolled away from the axe swing that would have split him in half. Greta was moving too, despite the agony in her ankle, throwing herself at Tark before he could bring his blade down on Warren's exposed back. She crashed into her brother with all her weight, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. Tark was stronger, but she was desperate, and she managed to land a solid hit with her fist to his throat that left him gagging. Drog had Warren backed against the cabin wall now, his sword raised for a killing blow, when the sharp crack of a snapping bowstring split the air. The arrow took Drog in the shoulder, spinning him around with the force of the impact, and Warren took advantage of the opening to sweep the orc's legs and send him crashing to the ground. Greta looked wildly around and saw a figure emerging from the forest, a human woman perhaps 60 years old with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a hard life lived outdoors. She held a bow with another arrow already nocked, and her aim was steady as she pointed it at Krug. "That is enough," the woman said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "The next one goes through someone's eye. I suggest you all stop and think very carefully about what happens next." The fighting ceased, everyone frozen in tableau. Krug was on one knee, his hand on his injured leg. Drog sat on the ground clutching his shoulder where the arrow protruded. Tark was still gasping for air, and Warren had positioned himself in front of Greta again, breathing hard but apparently uninjured. "Martha," Warren said, surprise and relief evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Heard the commotion from my place," Martha said, her bow never wavering. "Figured you might need help with these folks. Now then, are we going to have a civilized conversation, or do I need to start putting arrows in people?" Krug slowly straightened, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "This is not your concern, old woman. Our sister has betrayed our clan, and we have come to deliver justice." "Justice, is it?" Martha said, her tone skeptical. "Looks more like 3 armed males hunting down 1 injured female. Not much justice in those odds, seems to me." "She warned the humans about our raid," Drog snarled from his position on the ground. "Cost us weapons and supplies, made us look like fools. She has to pay for that." "So she saved lives," Martha translated calmly. "Yes, I can see how that would be embarrassing for you. Tell me, how many children were you planning to kill in that raid? How many grandmothers and grandfathers who could not defend themselves?" The question seemed to stump the three brothers, who looked at each other with confusion. Clearly, they had not expected to have to defend their actions to humans. Krug recovered first, drawing himself up to his full impressive height. "Humans and orcs have been at war for generations. They kill us, we kill them. This is the way of things." "And maybe it is time for a new way," Warren said quietly. "Your sister saw that, had the courage to act on it. Punishing her for choosing peace over violence just perpetuates the cycle." "Pretty words from a human," Krug spat. "But words do not change reality. She has betrayed her blood, and blood demands blood. That is our law." Greta stepped forward, moving around Warren despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "Then take my blood, Krug, but only mine. These humans have done nothing except show me kindness when they had every reason to leave me to die. Your quarrel is with me, not them." "Greta, no," Warren started, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "This is my choice, Warren. You have already risked too much for me." She turned back to her brothers, squaring her shoulders despite the fear that threatened to choke her. "I will go with you willingly. We'll face whatever punishment Father has decreed, but only if you swear to leave this place in peace and never return." Krug considered this, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "No, you forfeited the right to negotiate when you betrayed us. We will take you, and we will kill anyone who has aided you. Those are Father's orders, and I will not disobey." "Then I guess we have a problem," Martha said pleasantly, her arrow still trained on Krug. "Because I am not inclined to let you murder my neighbor and his guest. So here is what is going to happen instead. You three are going to turn around and walk back into that forest, and you are going to tell your father that you lost the trail and could not find your sister. In return, I will not put an arrow through something important, and we will all live to see another sunrise. Sound fair?" "You cannot stop all three of us," Drog said, though he made no move to stand. "Eventually you will run out of arrows or miss your shot." "Maybe," Martha agreed. "But I guarantee I will take at least two of you down before that happens, and Warren there is not helpless despite what you might think. So the question is, which two of you want to die today for the honor of killing one unarmed girl?" The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to cut with a blade. Greta watched her brothers, saw the calculation in their eyes, saw them weighing their orders against the very real possibility of death. Krug had always been brutal but not stupid, and she could see him working through the odds. Finally, Krug straightened and gestured to his brothers. "Get up." "We are leaving." "Krug," Father said. Tark started, but Krug cut him off with a savage gesture. "Father is not here, and I will not throw away our lives on a fool's errand. The girl is not worth it." He looked at Greta then, his expression cold. "You are dead to us, sister. If we ever cross paths again, there will be no mercy, no hesitation. You understand?" Greta nodded, her throat too tight for words. Krug turned and stalked into the forest, Tark following after helping Drog to his feet. They moved with the steady purpose of warriors making a tactical retreat, not defeated but choosing to fight another day. Within moments, they had vanished into the trees, leaving only the trampled earth to show they had been there at all. The silence after their departure was deafening. Greta found herself swaying, the adrenaline that had kept her upright draining away and leaving her weak and shaking. Warren caught her before she could fall, his arm around her waist, and helped her back into the cabin while Martha followed, finally lowering her bow. Inside, Greta collapsed onto the bed, her entire body trembling with reaction. She had faced her brothers, had been certain she was going to die, and yet somehow she was still alive. The reality of it hit her all at once, and she found herself gasping for air through the tightness in her chest. Warren knelt beside the bed, his hands gentle as he checked her over for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they hit you?" Greta shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Warren seemed to understand, his hand moving to cup the back of her head in a gesture of comfort. "It is all right. You are safe. They are gone." Martha busied herself starting a fire and putting water on to boil, moving around the cabin with the familiarity of someone who had been there before. When she had tea steeping, she brought 2 cups over and pressed one into Greta's shaking hands. "Drink," she ordered, her voice gruff but kind. "It will help with the shock." Greta obeyed, the hot liquid scalding her throat but grounding her back in her body. Slowly, her breathing began to even out, the worst of the shaking subsiding. Warren had moved to sit on the edge of the bed beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, and the solid presence of him was more comforting than she wanted to admit. "Thank you," Greta finally managed, looking at Martha. "You saved our lives. I do not know how to repay such a debt." Martha waved a dismissive hand. "No debt. I have known Warren here since he built this cabin, and he is a good neighbor. Was not about to let some thugs hurt him just because they decided might makes right." She fixed Greta with a sharp look. "You are the one who warned Riverbend, are you not?" "About the raid?" Greta nodded warily, not sure where this was going. Martha smiled, a fierce expression that reminded Greta of a hawk. "My granddaughter lives in Riverbend with her husband and their 3 children. They would have been killed in that raid, no question. So you saved my family, girl, and that means something to me." The weight of those words settled over Greta, and she felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had not cried in years, had trained herself not to show such weakness, but the kindness of these 2 humans after everything she had lost was almost more than she could bear. "I am sorry," she said, blinking hard against the moisture. "I did not mean to bring danger to your door." "Danger is part of living on the frontier," Warren said quietly. "You did not ask for this situation any more than we did, but we all made choices, and I would make the same ones again." Martha drained her tea and stood, collecting her bow. "I should get back before full dark." "Warren, you need anything, you know where to find me. And Greta, was it? You are welcome at my place any time. Any friend of Warren's is a friend of mine, and anyone who saves my grandbabies deserves a home if they need one." After Martha left, the cabin felt very quiet. Warren busied himself preparing dinner while Greta lay on the bed, her mind replaying the confrontation over and over. She had been cast out, officially declared dead to her clan. There was no going back now, no possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. Everything she had known, everyone she had grown up with, was lost to her forever. The grief of it hit her in waves, and she turned her face to the wall so Warren would not see the tears that finally escaped. She had known this would be the cost of her choice, had accepted it intellectually, but the reality was so much harder than she had imagined. She was alone now, truly alone, with no clan and no place in either the human or orc worlds. She felt the bed dip as Warren sat down beside her, and then his hand was on her shoulder, a warm, steady presence. "It is all right to grieve," he said softly. "Loss hurts, even when you knew it was coming." "How do you stand it?" Greta asked, her voice thick with tears. "How do you bear being alone?" Warren was quiet for a moment, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "Some days better than others. But I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely if you fill your life with things that matter. Work that has purpose, friendships that run deep even if they are few. And knowing that you made choices you can live with, even when they cost you everything." Greta rolled over to look at him, seeing her own grief reflected in his gray eyes. "Do you regret it, helping me?" "No," Warren said without hesitation. "Never." The certainty in his voice loosened something in her chest. She reached up and caught his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, for everything. I know I have been nothing but trouble since you found me." "You have been a guest who needed help," Warren corrected. "And maybe more than that, if I am being honest." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them had been willing to voice until now. Greta felt her heart skip a beat, hope and fear warring in her chest. More. Warren looked down at their joined hands, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have been alone for 3 years. Got comfortable with it, even came to prefer it in some ways. No complications, no one to worry about besides myself. But these past 2 weeks with you here, I have remembered what it is like to have someone to share things with, to talk to in the evenings, to cook for, to care about. And I find I do not want to go back to the way things were." Greta sat up slowly, ignoring the protest from her ankle until she was facing him fully. "Warren, I am an orc. You are human. Even if we both feel something, what kind of future could we possibly have? Your people will shun you, call you a monster lover. My people already want me dead. We would be outcasts from both worlds." "We are already outcasts," Warren pointed out. "I left my family and my whole life behind 3 years ago. You just did the same when you faced your brothers. We have nothing to lose except each other." "And everything to lose," Greta whispered. "If we try this and it does not work, if the prejudice becomes too much or we realize we made a mistake, we will both end up even more alone than we started." Warren reached up and cupped her face, his palm warm against her cheek. "That is true of anyone who falls in love, orc or human or otherwise. There are no guarantees, no promises that it will work out. But I learned when Sarah died that not taking the chance, not risking your heart, is its own kind of death. I do not want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to try." "You are the bravest person I know," Greta said, her voice breaking slightly. "You faced down 3 armed warriors to protect me. You opened your home to someone you should have seen as an enemy. You are offering me a place in your life when anyone else would have run." "Then let me be brave one more time," Warren said, and leaned forward to press his forehead against hers, a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. "Stay with me, Greta. Not as a guest or someone I am helping, but as someone building a life here beside me. We can figure the rest out as we go." Greta closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his breath against her lips, feeling the steady beat of his heart through their joined hands. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a mistake, that they were from different worlds and it could never work. But her heart, that treacherous organ, was singing a different song entirely. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Yes, I will stay." Warren pulled back just enough to look at her, and the smile that spread across his face was brighter than any she had seen from him before. Then he was kissing her, gentle and careful as if she was something precious, and Greta found herself kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. It was nothing like she had imagined a first kiss would be. There was no urgency or desperation, no feeling of rushing toward something. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding a place you belonged that you had not even known you were searching for. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his stubble, and his hands cradled her face as if she was the most valuable thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers again. "I should check your ankle," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "That stunt you pulled outside probably did not help the healing." Greta laughed, the sound watery but genuine, ever the practical one. "Someone has to be," Warren replied, but his eyes were warm with affection. He helped her settle back against the pillows and carefully unwrapped the bandage, examining the ankle with gentle fingers. "It held up better than I expected, actually. Still swollen, but no new damage that I can see." As he rewrapped her ankle with fresh bandages, Greta watched him with something close to wonder. This human man, who had every reason to hate her kind, was tending to her injuries with the same care he might show to someone of his own people. More than that, he had just offered her a place in his life, a chance at a future she had thought was lost forever. "What happens now?" she asked as he tied off the bandage. "I mean, practically speaking. I cannot stay hidden in this cabin forever, and eventually people will notice you have a guest." Warren settled beside her, his expression thoughtful. "Martha knows, and she seemed accepting enough. As for the others, well, the nearest neighbor besides her is 5 miles away, and people on the frontier tend to mind their own business. If anyone asks, we can tell them the truth that I found you injured and offered you shelter while you healed. After that, what we are to each other is no one's business but ours. And if my clan comes back, if they send more than just my brothers, then we will deal with it together," Warren said firmly. "You are not alone anymore, Greta. Whatever comes, we face it as partners." The word partners resonated in her chest, filling some of the hollow spaces left by her exile. She had never had a true partner before, had never been seen as an equal by anyone in her clan. The idea that this human saw her that way, valued her that way, was almost overwhelming. They ate dinner together that night, talking about practical matters and carefully not examining too closely the massive change that had just occurred between them. Warren told her about the cabin, about his plans to expand it eventually, about the garden and the traps and the hunting trails he used. Greta listened and offered suggestions, feeling her way into this new role of partner rather than guest. When it came time to sleep, Warren hesitated, clearly uncertain about the new boundaries between them. Greta solved the problem by simply pulling back the blankets and gesturing for him to join her. "You have been sleeping in that chair for 2 weeks," she said. "Your back must be killing you. There is room enough for both of us." Warren settled beside her carefully, both of them acutely aware of the other's presence. But exhaustion won out over awkwardness, and within minutes they were both asleep, Greta's head tucked against Warren's shoulder and his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and growing. Greta's ankle healed slowly but steadily, and as it did, she began to take on more of the work around the cabin. She was a good hunter when Warren finally trusted her ankle enough to let her come with him, better than he was in some ways, with the keen senses and strength of her orc heritage. She knew how to dress game, how to preserve meat, how to tan hides and work leather. Warren taught her the things he knew that she did not: how to tend the garden, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to repair tools and maintain the cabin. They worked together with an easy efficiency that came from mutual respect and growing affection, and the cabin gradually began to feel like a home rather than just a shelter. Martha visited often, always managing to have some excuse for why she needed to check on Warren, but clearly just wanting to satisfy herself that both he and Greta were well. She treated Greta with the same gruff kindness she showed Warren, and gradually, Greta began to relax around the older woman, to trust that her acceptance was genuine. One evening, about 6 weeks after Greta's brothers had been driven off, Martha sat at their table sharing a meal of roasted venison and root vegetables. "You two should think about getting married properly," she said without preamble, in that direct way she had. "Living together the way you are, people will talk eventually. Best to make it official." Greta nearly choked on her food and Warren's ears went red. "Martha," he started, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I am not saying this to meddle, boy. I am saying it because you both deserve the protection that marriage provides. Greta especially. As your wife, she would have legal standing, rights that she does not have as just some orc woman living in the woods. Anyone who wanted to come after her would have to deal with human law first." Warren looked at Greta, his expression unreadable. "She is right. I had not thought about it that way, but marriage would offer you protections beyond just my word." Greta set down her fork, her heart hammering in her chest. "Is that the only reason? Legal protection?" "No," Warren said quietly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "No, it is not. I love you, Greta. I know it has only been a couple of months, but I love you and I want you to be my wife if you will have me." Martha made a satisfied noise and stood. "Well then, I will just be going now and leave you two to discuss this like adults." She paused at the door and looked back with a smile. "For what it is worth, I think you are good for each other. And Greta, that man has been half dead for 3 years. You brought him back to life. Do not let go of that." After she left, Warren and Greta sat in silence for a moment, still holding hands across the table. Finally, Greta spoke, her voice soft. "I never thought I would marry at all, much less marry a human. In my clan, marriages are arranged for political purposes, to strengthen alliances or produce strong children. Love is not really part of the equation. And here," Warren asked. "With me?" Greta stood and came around the table, settling into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. "Here with you, I have found something I did not even know I was missing. Love and partnership and respect. You see me as a person, not just a tool or a problem to be solved. So yes, Warren Jameson, I will marry you, if you will have an orc wife and all the complications that brings." Warren answered by kissing her, deep and thorough, his hands tightening on her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he smiled against her lips. "I think I can handle the complications." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who asked no questions about the bride's green skin and tusks. Martha stood as witness, along with 2 of Warren's trapper friends who had overcome their initial shock to offer genuine congratulations. It was a small gathering, nothing like the elaborate clan ceremonies Greta had grown up with, but it felt more real and meaningful than any of those ever had. Greta wore a simple dress that Martha had helped her sew, dark green linen that brought out the warm tones in her skin, and Warren wore his best shirt with his grandfather's silver clasp at the throat. When the preacher asked if they would love and honor each other all the days of their lives, they answered in unison, their voices strong and sure. The kiss that sealed their vows was sweet and full of promise, and when they turned to face their small gathering of guests, Greta felt tears prickling at her eyes for the second time since leaving her clan. But these were tears of joy rather than grief, tears that came from finding a place she belonged after thinking she would always be alone. Martha hosted a small celebration at her cabin, with food and drink, and even music from one of the trappers who played a fiddle. Greta found herself dancing with Warren, laughing as he spun her carefully around the small space, mindful of her ankle which still protested if she pushed it too hard. She felt his happiness radiating from him like warmth from a fire, and she knew her own joy was equally visible. Later, when they returned to their cabin under a sky full of stars, Warren carried her over the threshold despite her protests that she could walk perfectly well. "Tradition," he explained, setting her down gently inside. "I am told the groom carries the bride into their home." "And who told you this tradition?" Greta asked, amused. "Martha. She was very insistent that we do things properly." Warren pulled her close, his hand spanning her waist. Of course, she also said we should have a proper wedding night, though I told her that was definitely none of her business. Greta laughed and kissed him, feeling the last of her old life falling away like a shed skin. She was Greta Greystone Jameson now, wife of Warren Jameson, and she was home in a way she had never been before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever prejudices they would face from both humans and orcs, they would face together. The first winter was hard, as all frontier winters were. The snows came early and stayed late, and there were days when they could not venture outside at all due to the blizzards. But the cabin was sturdy and well provisioned, and Greta found she did not mind the forced isolation. It gave her and Warren time to truly know each other, to share stories and dreams, to build the foundation of their life together without outside interference. Warren taught her to read that winter, painstakingly going through the handful of books he owned until she could sound out the words on her own. Greta had never learned letters in her clan, where such things were considered useless for females, and the discovery that she could unlock the stories trapped in ink and paper felt like magic. In return, Greta taught Warren some of the orc crafts she knew. How to work metal in ways that human blacksmiths did not know, creating alloys that were lighter but stronger. How to track prey through any weather by reading signs most humans would miss. How to fight with knife and axe in the brutal, efficient style of orc warriors, skills that Warren practiced with dedication, even though he hoped never to need them. They learned each other's languages too, the guttural syllables of Orcish mixing with the softer sounds of the common tongue, until they could switch between them effortlessly. Greta loved the way Warren's accent mangled some of the harder Orcish sounds, and he teased her about the way she sometimes forgot human words when she was excited or angry. Spring came late but beautiful, the forest exploding into green life seemingly overnight. With the thaw came visitors, trappers and traders passing through on their way to larger settlements, and gradually word spread about Warren's orc wife. The reactions varied wildly, from acceptance to disgust to outright hostility, but Warren faced each one with the same calm dignity. When a trader refused to do business with them because of Greta's presence, Warren simply took his furs to a different trader. When a group of hunters made crude comments about interspecies relationships, Warren stared them down until they shuffled away embarrassed. And when one fool actually drew a weapon and called Greta a monster who needed to be put down, Warren moved so fast the man was disarmed and on the ground before he could blink. "You will apologize to my wife," Warren said coldly, his boot on the man's chest, "or I will make you regret ever setting foot on my land." The apology, when it came, was grudging and insincere, but Warren accepted it and let the man leave with his dignity mostly intact. After he was gone, Greta wrapped her arms around Warren from behind and pressed her face against his back. "You did not have to do that," she murmured. "I can handle insults." "I know you can," Warren replied, turning in her embrace to hold her properly. "But you should not have to, not in your own home. And if defending you means making enemies, then so be it. I chose you, Greta. I choose you every day, and I will not let anyone make you feel less than what you are." That summer, Martha's granddaughter came to visit, bringing her husband and their 3 children to meet the legendary orc woman who had saved their lives. The children were fascinated by Greta's tusks and green skin, asking endless questions with the innocent directness of the young. Greta found herself charmed by them despite her initial nervousness, and by the end of the visit, the youngest girl had declared Greta her favorite person ever. "You saved us," Martha's granddaughter said quietly as she was preparing to leave. "I never got to thank you properly. My children would have died in that raid, and I would have died trying to protect them. What you did, warning the town, it cost you everything. I just wanted you to know that we do not take that sacrifice lightly." Greta felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I did what anyone should have done. The fact that my clan thought differently, that is on them, not on me." "Still," the younger woman said, taking Greta's hand in both of hers. "Thank you. You will always be welcome at our table, you and Warren both. And if you ever need anything, anything at all, you send word and we will be there." After they left, Greta stood on the porch watching the wagon disappear down the trail, Warren's arm around her shoulders. "I think I am starting to understand," she said softly. "Understand what?" "Why you helped me that day in the forest. You said you made the choice you could live with, and I thought I understood, but I did not really. But seeing those children today, knowing they are alive because I made a hard choice, it makes it real in a way it has not been before." Warren pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You saved lives, Greta. Not just those specific children, but everyone in that settlement. And by doing so, you proved that orcs and humans do not have to be enemies, that there can be understanding and cooperation between us. That matters more than you know." As summer turned to autumn, Greta discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a collection of small signs that she initially dismissed until they became impossible to ignore. When she finally told Warren, sitting at their table over breakfast one morning, his face went through such a rapid series of emotions that she almost laughed. "A child," he said, as if testing the words. "We are going to have a child." "Yes," Greta confirmed, nervous despite her certainty that he would be happy. "If you are not ready, if this is too soon," Warren cut her off by pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I am terrified," he admitted, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I have no idea how to be a father, especially to a half-orc child, but I am also more excited than I have been about anything in years. A child, Greta, our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Greta found herself grateful for her orc constitution, which made the usual human discomforts far less severe. She continued to work around the cabin and help with the hunting well into her 6th month, only finally agreeing to rest more when Warren literally begged her to take it easier. Martha was overjoyed at the news and appointed herself unofficial grandmother, arriving with baby clothes she had saved from her own children, and offering advice that ranged from helpful to absurd. She also made it clear that she would be present for the birth, along with a midwife she trusted, and that Warren should prepare himself for a lot of waiting and worrying. The baby came on a cold night in early winter, arriving with the same determination her mother had shown in everything. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Warren genuinely thought he might lose both Greta and the child. But when the baby finally emerged, screaming her fury at the world, he felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. She was perfect, a tiny creature with green-tinged skin that was lighter than Greta's but darker than his, small nubs where tusks would eventually grow, and her mother's amber eyes. They named her Lily after the wildflowers that grew by the stream, and Warren held her with shaking hands while Greta rested after her ordeal. "Look at her," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "She is perfect." Greta smiled tiredly from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "She is ours. That makes her perfect by definition." The first year of Lily's life was a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. She grew fast, faster than a human child would, with the robust health of her orc heritage combined with her father's resilience. By 6 months she was crawling, by 9 months walking, and by her first birthday she was speaking in simple sentences that mixed orcish and common tongue indiscriminately. She was also fearless in a way that gave Warren heart attacks on a regular basis. Greta would laugh at his panic when Lily climbed things she should not be able to climb or wandered into the forest without permission, reminding him that orc children were encouraged to be independent and adventurous. They compromised by letting Lily explore, but always under supervision. And gradually, Warren learned to relax and trust his daughter's considerable abilities. The frontier community, small and scattered as it was, gradually accepted the unusual family. Some of that acceptance came from exposure, from seeing Warren and Greta working together as equals, from watching Lily grow into a bright, happy child who charmed everyone she met. Some of it came from necessity, because frontier life was hard enough without making enemies of capable neighbors. And some of it came from the simple fact that Warren and Greta were good people who helped when help was needed and asked for nothing in return beyond basic respect. When Lily was 2, a group of orc raiders attacked a settlement 20 miles away, and in the aftermath, a delegation of humans arrived at Warren and Greta's cabin demanding to know whose side they were on. Warren invited them in, served them food and drink, and then told them very plainly that they were on the side of peace and would defend their home and their neighbors against anyone who threatened them, orc or human. "My wife saved Riverbend," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "She chose humans over her own clan, and it cost her everything she had known. We have built a life here together, and we have raised our daughter to believe that people should be judged by their actions, not their blood. So if you are asking whether we would fight against orc raiders, the answer is yes. But if you are asking whether we hate orcs in general, the answer is no. We judge individuals, not species." The delegation left satisfied, and word spread that the mixed couple on the frontier could be counted on as allies. That reputation was tested several times over the years that followed, when raiders both orc and human threatened the area. Warren and Greta always responded, sometimes with warnings, sometimes with direct intervention, and always with the same principle guiding them: protect the innocent, judge by actions, not race. Lily grew up strong and smart, with her mother's amber eyes and her father's determination. She learned to hunt and track from Greta, learned to read and write and work metal from Warren, and learned from both of them that the world did not have to be divided into orcs versus humans. She made friends easily, charming both species with her open nature and refusal to see boundaries that others insisted existed. When she was 8, a group of orc children appeared at the cabin, refugees from a clan that had been destroyed in fighting with another tribe. They were dirty and scared and clearly expecting to be turned away, but Greta took one look at them and invited them inside. She and Warren fed them, gave them clean clothes, and listened to their story. Their clan had been attacked by a larger tribe that wanted their territory. Most of the adults had been killed in the fighting, and the children had been fleeing through the forest for days. They had heard stories about an orc woman who lived with humans, and in desperation had sought her out, hoping she might offer shelter. Greta and Warren looked at each other across the table, and Warren saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They could not turn away children in need, regardless of species. But taking in 5 orphaned orc children would bring complications and dangers they had so far avoided. "We will make it work," Greta said quietly in English, and Warren nodded. They made room in the cabin, which suddenly felt much smaller, and sent word to Martha and their other neighbors about the situation. The responses varied, but enough people offered support that Warren and Greta felt confident they could make it work. Over the following months, the children healed from their trauma and began to integrate into the small frontier community. 3 of them eventually moved on, finding places with orc clans that were more open to peace with humans. But two stayed, a brother and sister named Krog and Mara, who became like additional children to Warren and Greta, and like siblings to Lily. The cabin had to be expanded, and the workload increased exponentially, but the sound of children's laughter filling the space made every hardship worth it. Years passed in the steady rhythm of frontier life. Lily grew into a young woman, strong and capable and beautiful in a way that transcended species boundaries. Krog became a skilled blacksmith, setting up his own forge near the cabin and creating tools and weapons that were sought after throughout the region. Mara discovered a talent for healing, studying with Martha and the local midwife until she could handle most medical emergencies. Warren and Greta aged together, their love deepening and maturing like wine. They had their fights, of course, moments when cultural differences or just plain stubbornness led to raised voices and hurt feelings. But they had also learned how to apologize, how to compromise, how to choose each other even when it was difficult. On their 10th anniversary, Warren took Greta back to the spot where he had first found her, the birch tree where she had sat with a twisted ankle and her life in ruins. They stood there together, older and grayer but infinitely richer in all the ways that mattered. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked, his arm around her waist. "Giving up your clan, your whole world for this life?" Greta leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I gave up a world that valued violence over compassion, strength over kindness. What I found instead was a partner who sees me as an equal, children who will grow up knowing that differences do not have to divide, and a community that judges me by my actions. No, Warren, I have never regretted it, not for a single day." Warren kissed her then, slow and sweet, and she could taste the salt of tears on his lips, though she was not sure if they were his or hers. "I love you," he said when they finally broke apart. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I know," Greta replied, smiling up at him. "I love you too, you foolish human who knelt in the moss and bound my ankle gently when you should have left me to die. Thank you for being brave enough to see past what I was supposed to be and recognize what I could become." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, to the life they had built together against all odds. Behind them, the forest stretched endlessly, full of dangers and wonders, but ahead lay home, warmth, family, and a future that they would face together no matter what challenges arose. The story of how an orc woman and a human man fell in love, how they built bridges between two worlds, would be told around frontier fires for generations. Some would add embellishments, making it more dramatic or romantic than reality. But the truth, the simple, beautiful truth, was that two people from different worlds chose kindness over cruelty, love over hatred, and in doing so, proved that the boundaries that divided them were never as solid as everyone believed. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the prejudices they overcame or the hardships they endured, but the quiet daily choice to see each other as partners, to build something together that was stronger than what either could have created alone. Their love was not always easy, but it was real and true and lasting. And in a world that often seemed determined to divide people into us versus them, that love was a small rebellion that changed everything it touched. Warren and Greta lived long lives, surrounded by family and friends, leaving behind children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy of choosing compassion over cruelty. And years after they were gone, people would still tell stories about the human man who knelt to bind an orc woman's twisted ankle gently, and how that single moment of kindness changed two lives, and eventually began to change the world.